For the last 10 years or so, have done the academic study of religion and Islam in particular, and I've always taken an interest in Christian-Muslim dialogue. And as someone who studies Islamic traditions, what's very obvious to me is that we talk about Islam as if it's one thing, and we talk about Christianity as if it's one thing. But at least on the side of Islam, which I'm more familiar with, Islam is not one thing. There's actually many, many different Islams, and these differ in creed, they differ in ritual, they differ in theology, they differ in ethics. And we sort of just lump all these things into one. And we have a tendency, this is all of us because because of the internet and YouTube, we often hear from what we call Islam, but it's actually one person's interpretation of Islam or one community's interpretation of Islam that we're actually hearing. So I just thought it would be beneficial to have this dialogue with you guys so I could speak to some of the diversity that we have within Islam on these issues that Muslims and Christians agree and disagree on. And I think it's something that a biblical Unitarian could be sympathetic to, because you would face the same issue where people think Christianity is the majority, whether it's Catholic or Orthodox or whatever the majority in the region is. People don't often think of biblical Unitarian Christianity as Christianity when they hear it. So it's the same in Christianity, that there's a plurality of Christianities. So this is sort of where I'm coming from. And I just thought I'd begin by just quickly screen sharing here for you all. And what you can see here, if you can see my screen, there should be a diagram that you see here. Everyone, do you see that? Yep. So this is like a chart I made. And what you have here is different types of branches of Islam. The boxes that you see here, this is in terms of ritual and law. So there's all these different schools, Shia and Sunni. We often hear about Shia and Sunni only, but then each one has its own sub-branches. And the green boxes are law, ritual, and creed. But then these words over here on the right, these are theological schools. So there isn't one Islamic theology, there's many different kinds. And different Muslims will subscribe to like one type of theology if they know about it, and then they'll practice one type of legal, ritual, creedal school. And depending on which combination you choose, you will get like a different view of Jesus. You'll get a different view of God. So that's sort of what I want to bring to this conversation. So when Christians say what do we have in common with Muslims and where do we differ? One would really have to specify which Muslim. Are we talking about Sunni Muslims, and then which Sunni theology? Are we talking about Sufi Sunni Muslims or non-Sufi? Are we talking about Shia Muslims? Because you will find different views of Jesus and Muhammad and all this. The other thing I would mention is that if you're only looking at the Quran on its own, you will get a different meaning or a different set of meanings than if you're interpreting the Quran according to one of these traditions that you see. I'll give you a couple of examples because some of these things, there's certain issues that are like contentious, Muslims and Christians disagree about and stuff. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean on this. So let's just take the term Islam. Like, what does the word Islam mean? So today, Islam is the name of a religion with boundaries, right? The boundaries usually believe in God and Muhammad as his messenger. Like, that's what Islam means. So anyone who says, God, I believe in God, one God, and Muhammad as his prophet, you're a Muslim. But in the Quran, the word Islam doesn't actually mean that. Like in the Quran, the word Islam simply means surrender to God. What Jesus in the gospel refers to as he who does the will of my Father, right? So, and there's been academics who've studied like how we know this is the case. So if you read the Quran by itself and you don't look at later Muslim interpretations, you sort of read the Quran on its own, sort of what biblical Unitarians do with the Bible. If you read the Bible through the 4th century creeds, you'll get one meaning. But if you read the Bible through 1st century ideas, you'll get a different meaning. So we can do the same with the Quran. And even the word Islam, it simply means monotheistic tradition in the Quran. So when Muhammad talks about Islam with, you could say, a small I, he's just talking about this perennial idea of monotheism, which is faith in God, obedience to God through the guidance God has sent down to humans. And that guidance, Muslims believe that, God has given that guidance through many, many different figures throughout history. Every community received divine guidance about the one God, how to live ethically, how to submit oneself to the one God. And the Quran itself acknowledges in Surah 5, it says, to each we have given a law and a way. So it acknowledges that different people were given different guidance on how to submit to the one God. But this is important because the 7th century, you could say Quranic, you guys use the term biblical, you could say the Quranic meaning of Islam is this universal monotheistic tradition. And from that perspective, the message of Muhammad is an instance of that. The message that Muhammad taught was for his people in the 7th century. It was this universal monotheism, but tailored to that context. 7th century Arabia, a pagan environment, which also had Jews and Christians. And you could say that the true message of Judaism, however we want to define that, right, is another instance. And sort of like the core of Christianity is another instance. So this is sort of the context that someone like me is approaching. And this is why dialogue is important, because if I'm a believer in Muhammad's message, which later gets called Islam, right? So then the meaning of Islam changes. You could say the small I becomes a capital I. And now Islam means the religion of Muhammad. And in a sense, that's natural. This happens to all religions, right? A universal idea becomes institutionalized. But the point is that if you go to this original 7th century Quranic idea of Islam, that would mean those who believe in Muhammad could learn a lot from those who believe in Moses and Jesus. And that's why dialogue is very important. And another quick example, I'll focus on Jesus specifically, but this idea of the crucifixion. So you heard from I'm sure you guys have heard from many, many people that the Quran says Jesus was not crucified. I'm sure you've heard this, and this is the majority Muslim belief. We have to acknowledge that most Muslims believe this, but the basis for that belief is not the Quran alone. It's the Quran being interpreted through extra Quranic material called hadiths, often which contain later stories that circulated from what you could say fringe Jewish Christian ideas. So this idea that Jesus did not get put on the cross, that someone else was turned into Jesus' form and he was put on the cross, most Muslims do believe in this, but the Quran doesn't say that. It's additional oral traditions, sort of word of mouth ideas that from outside the Quran that circulated maybe 150 years after the Quran. That's where that belief comes from. And I would propose to you that if you compare what the Quran actually says with the book of Acts, you will find agreement. So here's what I mean. So these are the verses right here that most Muslims today will turn to, and you'll hear it in your dialogues that, oh, look, the Quran says, as for their saying, we killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, messenger of God. And then the Quran says, they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to appear to them. It doesn't say he was made to appear. It says it was made to appear to them. Now, the question is this: what do the verses right before say? Because who is the they? Like, which group is the they that boasted that they killed the Messiah? Because the Quran is denying that they killed him. So if you actually read the Quran holistically and we look at the verses right before, the Quran is talking about a group of Israelites, just a group, not all of them, a group of Israelites who disobeyed God habitually. So it talks about this group of people, and the Torah contains the same critique of certain Israelites who broke the covenant of God. So the Quran is criticizing this group, and look at the pronouns them, their. So this group is being chastised. And then this group claimed that this group of Israelites claimed to have killed Jesus. So Jesus' enemies, Jesus' opponents claimed to have killed him. And the Quran says, no, they did not kill him. So then, did Jesus actually die? Well, in 2 other verses, the Quran says that God caused Jesus to die. Twice it says that. It says God caused Jesus to die. One time it's in first person. God says to Jesus, I will cause you to die and raise you to myself. It doesn't even say raise you to heaven. It says God says to Jesus, raise you to me. Right? So that's what the Quran says. So the Quran, I would propose, you don't have to agree with me, and most Muslims won't agree with me based on their own traditions, but from a Quranic perspective, the Quran is denying the agency of Jesus' enemies to have killed him, and it's saying, no, it was God's will that Jesus died. And I'll end off by simply saying that if you compare this to Acts chapter 2, Peter is preaching, and Peter basically says, he's critiquing Jesus' enemies among the Israelites. But Peter says that Jesus was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, right? And that you put him on the cross, but this is actually God's will that it happened. So I would argue that here the 2 scriptures are actually in agreement. The Quran is not denying Jesus' crucifixion. It is denying the claim of certain enemies of Jesus. And I'll simply add at the end that we do know that the Talmud, which was compiled a century before Muhammad and the Quran come about, the Talmud claims that, according to some rabbis, that the rabbis executed and tried Jesus and stoned him. So some rabbis, we don't know who they are, but they boasted that they killed Jesus, and they slandered Mary. They said Mary is like a harlot or something. So the Quranic verse that you see on the right seems to be a direct response to the Talmud, because it defends Mary as well in this section. So that's what that's just one example of how, if you sort of dig deep a little bit, we will find a little more agreement than we think on Christian-Muslim dialogue. So thank you.